Dear tutor, things you wanna ask me, anything will do. We're all at home too, and all around the world with you.
The transition has been tough because for me, I've had to get used to a whole new level of technological devices and platforms, and just learning the ropes of delivering music in a new way. So that transition has been difficult, but worth doing, because we all need to embrace the fact that technology is here to stay, and we need to stay with the times. It's a bit soul-destroying when my 6-year-old daughter can work a machine faster than me, though. And actually, as a teacher, there have been one or two unexpected advantages. I think the different angles that you can find using virtual teaching, and actually, so you can really get up close and really demonstrate the hand, the technique. And amazingly, the students that I've been working with online seem really rather engaged, and maybe that's because they really like the screen. So some, I think, have been concentrating better remotely than they do occasionally when we've been one-on-one in a teaching room. What are the benefits for performers? Well, I think just being online means that you are noticing and you're exposed to a whole load of more resources than you would otherwise have gone out to look for. I'm just thinking about two wonderful conversations that I might not necessarily have noticed or been taken in by if they hadn't been on the virtual platforms. And the idea that you can listen to a conversation with Nikki Benedetti and Alina Ibragimova, just total violin gold, that we can learn huge amounts from just by listening to those two great artists talking to each other. And the other one with Nikki and Augustin Hedlich, the same thing, just total gold. So there are huge resources available that we should embrace, and these virtual things are absolutely wonderful. It is restricting though, because it's just not the same as being in a room and rehearsing with people and getting that feedback instantly. And I missed that, and I really miss the artistic conversations that you can't really have musically online and get that instant feedback.
Now, I'm not a performer, so I can't claim to know much about the performance aspect of doing this online. I'm going to talk from a teaching perspective and say that virtual teaching is wonderful, and it's a blessing because we have at least some way of being able to teach our students. However, I find it exhausting on another level, and I think that I was talking to a friend last night, and I said, it's like you can see things going wrong and you don't have the power to change them, because there's just certain things you can do in a classroom that you can't do online. And I'm finding the absence of cues, physical cues and non-verbal cues are lacking on a virtual platform. And so you're trying to second guess so much over Zoom or Skype. So I'm really excited to go back to a classroom at some point and see my students. I think the way I've been describing it is the virtual platform is sort of 2-dimensional teaching, and the being in a classroom is 3-dimensional, and I'm missing that third dimension to my teaching. So yes, it has its pros, and I think that for the future that a lot more can be done online, which is really exciting, but possibly as an addition and not as a replacement for being in the classroom.
It's obviously been a massive transition to a virtual world of music. In terms of teaching, I found it frustrating and challenging, but I've also enjoyed some of it. Obviously, the frustration comes from, first and foremost, you don't have that connection with your pupils, your students. You're not there with them. You don't have that face-to-face contact. Also, sometimes solving an issue might just be a little correction of a finger on a string or moving a bow down, and being in the same room, you can quite easily do that, and obviously you can't do that over Zoom or over whatever virtual platform you're using. Also, there can be practicalities, getting the camera in the right, especially for double bass, getting a camera where you can see the left hand and the bow, and it's at the right angle, and you can hear it. Hearing a double bass can be really difficult across a virtual call. So yeah, teaching, but the flip side of that is that I've seen a massive upside to it, and I've had to adapt and change so much of what I'm doing as an educator. It's made me much more patient, which is always a good thing, I think. And also it's meant I've had to try and go down find new ways to solve problems, because I'm not in the same room as them. So I quite like that kind of challenge, and sort of finding ways to solve problems in a new way is always something I've really enjoyed. In terms of performance, I've not done a huge amount of performance. I've done a lot of remote recording, which has been quite interesting. You'll just be halfway through a take, and then the police will go past or something with the sirens on loud, or your neighbour upstairs will put the washing machine on. But again, it's a similar thing. I think the downside is not having an audience, and as a performer, I really thrive off the audience in the room and that atmosphere and that relationship. And on a virtual concert, you don't have that, and the virtual platform, it doesn't. You don't get that same sort of connection, which is a shame. But the plus side is that people are being massively creative, and are pushing down avenues they would never have gone, and really sort of investigating ways of performance that they've never tried, or they're collaborating with musicians they would never have collaborated with. So again, whilst there is a huge downside, and obviously performers and myself as a performer missing audiences, it has had its upside in terms of people really going in directions and going in new directions.
It's been absolutely insane, hasn't it? I have felt a real mixture of things. Sometimes I felt the way musical institutions and just individuals have tried to kind of just keep going as everything had been, but just virtualized. I've sometimes felt that a little jarring, because inevitably the quality of listening, of the listener's ability to hear things like the nuance through a dodgy phone speaker or something, to be just a bit limiting and sad. And it's never going to feel as good, is it, as a whole orchestra, for example, in a big space rehearsing and working and feeling it together at the same time. Simply the quality of the final product isn't going to be as good. So that has felt like a shame, and at times limiting and jarring and depressing. But at the same time, there is something very moving about the effort and the need that people feel, and I felt it too, of just having to still have that sort of communal experience. So it's definitely a duality there. On a slightly different tangent, it's been extraordinary to see how innovative and creative composers and other developers have been to try and get music to us in different forms. I've seen and read a bit about virtual reality coming into its own with this, and on other virtual platforms like video games and stuff. I'm not at all a pro in that department, but it is extraordinary to think that maybe that is going to be a new way of actually delivering a more meaningful community feeling for the arts. Who knows? So yeah, it's really, really, really hard, and I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling just this desperation to get back to normal. I cannot wait for the sort of skin-on-skin quality that an actual live performance just gives you.
Super Tutor, things you wanna ask me, anything will do. We're all at home too, and all around the world with you.
My biggest thing with students to give them confidence is to take them away from the music. I think the biggest hindrance and the thing that gets in the way of students performing confidently is the combination of having to think about the physical and the sound production whilst focusing on notes in front of them. So what I like to do is, whilst pushing them to gain more technical facility on the instrument with difficult pieces, at the same time supplementing that with simpler pieces where they can play a lot more from memory and focus way more on the physical and way more on the oral aspects of their performance. That certainly gives them more confidence to play, and also gives them regular senses of achievement from learning something simple from memory, and then getting them to perform those simpler pieces from memory in concerts. So they build up their confidence that way. And then, of course, gradually you start making the challenge a bit harder. But the whole idea of separating out kind of all the distractions that can happen when we're playing, so that there's as little to distract them as possible when they're actually performing. So yeah, taking away the music and getting them to play easier things from memory would be my answer to that question.
I think this can be one of the biggest challenges that a teacher can face with pupils who are struggling with confidence. I think at one point or another, every single musician in the world has struggled, with confidence and with that kind of underrating of their own abilities. If I have a student who's feeling not as confident and they're not feeling up to the task, or feeling that they're not good enough, obviously there's the words of encouragement, etc. But a couple of strategies I've used recording as a really good strategy. So getting them to play and record them and then play it back to themselves, and often when they hear themselves in that sort of separated way and detached way, when they hear it back, that can be a real like a shining light for them, and a real kind of light bulb moment when they hear the music that they've made and that they're making. It can really flick a switch in their head that says, oh, actually I do sound okay, or I do sound quite good, and give them a wee bit more confidence. And also setting goals and kind of something that's measurable can really help. So saying by the end of this month we want to be round about here, we want to be playing this piece, or we want to have achieved this technical skill, and setting goals like that can help students kind of focus. And it might just be that their brain prefers having that sort of measurable achieving this goal and achieving this goal, and that will allow their confidence to grow naturally. I think it's really important that you don't push too hard, and that we don't if we go too far the other way and it's too extreme, then that can really lead to the opposite happening and the confidence going even more. So allowing them to develop in their own time, but maybe with some helpful strategies such as recording, or whether that's goal setting or something like that.
That is such a beautiful question, and the answer, I would say, applies not only as a teacher to the student, but also as a musician to themselves. So for me, the number one thing, even though it's sort of the question stipulates aside from talking, etc., you need to somehow convey to the student or the self that they are worthwhile, unique, special individuals aside from their instruments, that they are worthwhile hearing, no matter how good or bad, or at whatever stage they are on their musical journey. So that is number one, just to try and convince somebody that they're just great just for being themselves. That's number one. Number two, though, I would say it's very easy, speaking from experience again, to not really believe people when they tell you that. You're like, yeah, whatever. So you need to make them believe it by pushing them out of their comfort zones and figuring out for themselves that they can do more than they think. And it's just a fact that we tend, as musicians, because we're sensitive and vulnerable human beings a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, we undervalue and underestimate our abilities. So by pushing ourselves and by pushing our students just in a very gentle and totally supported way out of their comfort zones, they'll figure it out for themselves that they are actually worth their salt.
I think the first thing to say is that insecurity is really common. I myself was desperately insecure when I was a 20-something musician, and I was really frustrated musically with myself. And I had huge numbers of instincts inside me that I just couldn't get out in a way that I wanted to, or in a way that seemed to make people happy. And I think that conflict was probably a contributing factor. So it became like a vicious circle, and I think that's dangerous. I suppose that's still the case with me. I think we learn to live with it, and we learn to trust ourselves a little more as we get more experienced. But I think the big point to make on this one is that so many people will be suffering from the same insecurities. And I think also something to be reassured about is that vulnerability is all right. I think it's part of what makes us genuine. So admitting your insecurities is really not a problem and could be really empowering. one of my teachers recognized talent in me, and I think recognized the internal conflicts that I was going through, and he advised me just to start with trying to be happy with where I was on any particular day. And I think that's a kind of nice sort of grounding message, is try to be happy with what you have at the moment, and then just keep working. So that would be that sort of, a word of advice on that. And then the other thing is, and I think this is not just through music, but through life. Sometimes it's good just to talk or to play through your musical ideas with somebody that you trust. Talk about it, and you will get so much more confidence in your own ideas if you are being interactive with them in a kind of safe environment. So try them with people, and don't be afraid to be insecure in public, in a safe way. Don't be afraid of that. You'll get lots of good feedback, lots of positivity, and even finding musical ideas that you realize don't work is a strength. So I hope that's helpful. I think it's always important to have someone in your life who can act as a mentor from time to time. So I've had wonderful teachers, and I've also been that person for young musicians. And I think recognizing the talent in the next generation and that interaction is part of the way to deal with this kind of insecurity that we all have.
Super tutor, things you wanna ask me, anything will do. We're all at home too, and all around the world with you.
Really good question. It's something I questioned a lot. So when I moved to London, I kind of set my feet at something very, very low. And actually, I didn't get many students at the time. And I think it's because it was too low. And I think that people tend to actually rate you on your fee a little bit. So don't make it too low, firstly. Don't undersell yourself. But be careful about this, because you need to, I think, for your sanity and for your kind of a guilt-free conscience, you need to be able to justify why you're charging a certain amount. For me personally, it was a case of, I upped it once. For instance, I had a couple of years experience of teaching under my belt, but not very much. And then when I did my Suzuki training, every year that I did Suzuki training, I upped it each year, because I felt like I had another year of really good knowledge under my belt. And I think it's all about what you put into your training and then what you can charge. Be careful about it, but also don't undersell yourself would be my advice. And then communicating it to parents is just being really honest and warning them. So if you're changing your fee in September, I would always write to my parents in the summer term and say, this is what's going to happen in September. I would completely understand if you can't learn with me anymore, but I'm upping it because of this. So I would say I've upped it this time because I've done a year of training. I feel like my skills have been developed. Or for instance, I upped it once because, rent's increased and I just was, not able to pay my rent. So it was a case of like, my living costs are a lot, and I feel it's time to up my rates like that. So just inform them early enough of what you're going to do in the future, so they've got time to either say yes or no, or find a new teacher if necessary.
Nobody likes talking about money, and I would say that it's just a really delicate balance between knowing your worth, so objectively being able to list, well, what is my training, what experience have I got, use your friends and colleagues in similar levels of their careers as a kind of barometer. What are they charging, in what cities or countries can you command this or that fee, then balancing that with obviously being able to survive. You don't want to undersell, and equally, I think if you do undersell, then people don't take you seriously. It's the classic thing. If you offer your services for free, people think it's not worth anything. So do charge for what you're doing, value what you're doing. And the third thing to balance, of course, though, is being able to sleep at night. You don't want to have a guilty conscience that you're overcharging and perhaps taking people for a ride. And I'm sure people are far from wanting to do that. So it's just, those are the three elements really to consider. And I think my number one, if I'm ever unsure, is to ask around, Don't be shy to broach the subject of fees because everyone deals with it. And yeah, it shouldn't be taboo, essentially. As for when to put your fees up and how to convey that to the parents or the students themselves, I would just say be totally direct and upfront about it. Give them lots of advance warning. But essentially, people expect fees to change over a course of time. So just own it. Explain your reasons. Just be really direct, and they'll definitely appreciate that.
In terms of setting fees, I've always sort of used the guidance of the MU or ISM, other professional bodies, as they offer guidance on rates and how much you should possibly be offering, and the fee you should be charging. And these change regularly, so keeping an eye on that. And if it goes up, then I tend to raise my fees in accordance to that. Communicating it with the parents is always, you would always hope to have a good relationship with the parents of students and with the student themselves if it's an adult learner that's paying for lessons. So if you have that good relationship, and then having explaining your process, so explaining that you use these resources from the Musicians Union, can really help that conversation and keep it as a professional conversation, because you are there as a professional. You're delivering lessons, and it is your job. So it is a professional conversation, and having those resources can really help keep that conversation on track and keep it quite simple. And you can even show the parents, and that will help them to understand your process and why there's maybe being an increase.
Oh gosh, I hate talking about money. I think lots of people hate talking about money. It's such an awkward subject. So this is a really delicate one and a tricky one to deal with, I know. I think the first thing you need to ask yourself is, are you charging the appropriate amount? And that might not be the same across the board. So, for example, prices in London are higher in general. You may need to take into account the level of the student that you're working with. So the hourly rate for a beginner might need to be a little bit less just to get them going. And I think also, and this is the tricky bit for all young and teachers in the early stages of their career, you need to have a kind of reference point for your own level. So do you value your teaching standard as the equivalent of a really good school level? Do you value your teaching standard better than that? Are you junior conservatoire level, senior conservatoire level? And then do some research about what the amounts those lessons cost at that level. So that's where you need to be pitching the amount that you charge. I think a big moment for me was being able to be more confident in my own level. Was when I was appointed to teach at the Junior Royal College of Music in London. And with that came a huge amount of kind of clout, which meant that I could be confident about valuing my teaching at a higher level than I had before. And at that point, I was able to up my rate without feeling bad about it. I always tended to wait. So I would stay at the same rate for a while, so like more than a year, 2 years, 3 years. Because I think it's sensible to raise the rate by an increment that people would find sensible, like £5. So that would be something that I would consider. Just go up in fives, but don't go up every year. And when do you do this? Well, there are three times that make sense in a year. September goes with the start of the school year. January, the new year. And maybe you want to consider April, which is the start of the tax year, and then just be confident about just broaching that with the parents, that they will be expecting actually that your rates to go up, especially if the lessons are going well and your career is going well. And just one more bit of advice, and this is really difficult for insecure musicians like this: don't undersell yourself. If your rate is too low, you might not be taken seriously. So there is a balance there. Good luck with this one. It's tough.